So my question is, Rose, how do we begin to build capacity in terms of reasonable leadership? How do we build a ladder for this emerging dialogue that understands and will not be played on this diversity issue? Because out in Sunnydale, see, the kids say all the Chinamen's are taking everything. That's what they say, quote unquote. And I have to tell them, what you need to do is understand your history, that the Chinese people that you were talking to were invading you before you. And not only that, when we were entered into the state as free people, Chinese people were they had made an enormous sacrifice. So how do we build a current and 21st century group of leadership that understands the value and the potentiality of this rich diversity?
I say it's very easy if you find a common denominator that binds you, not what divides you. Who cares what color skin you have if you are neighbors, right? And your bus don't come. Your bus don't come. You'll be late, your neighbor will be late, your kids will be late for school as her kids will be late for school. It's the same. So if the public safety issue is an issue in your community, it afflicts you as much as it afflicts the Hispanic guy down the street or the African American lady next door to you. It's the same. But you just have to find people to care about the same things and then work together. And then you'll find pretty soon we're talking about lining up, linking up communities. It is very different from the history of the African Americans, you know, and what you have accomplished. So my question is that now that it has been several hundred years, then can we then replicate the same type of community, the same kind of village spirit that we can find, you know, the same people needing jobs, the same people needing housing, the same people needed health care. So we find those common threats and form alliances and work for all of our benefit. You know, if we got low-income housing, all of us benefit. If we got better public transportation, all of us will benefit. So that you have to find a common denominator and work as a community like we're trying to do. I'm not saying we have been very successful. We have been somewhat successful in certain areas because I was able to convince our small businesses in order to create a conducive atmosphere for small business to prosper, you really need to care for the people that live there. You need to care for their transit. You need to care for their education, their health care. They're all interwoven. Nothing is by itself, standalone. And until you manage to get a community to understand that all your interest is my interest will benefit you, then people will band together and work together.
I love history too. I'm pretty sure you're aware of the current status of the African American community right now in San Francisco. And if you look at education rates, incarceration rates, and so forth, you've probably seen the out-migration study. How can we work together with the Asian community?
The exodus of families from San Francisco has long been coming because of our geographic location We have wonderful weather, good topography, good views. And so the real estate by in itself is a very attractive area for people to live. So people desire to live in this city. And then 800,000 people, we should be very proud that we have a world-class museum, we have beautiful parks, we have world-class library, ballet, symphony, you name it. We have it, except that 800,000 people, we usually cannot sustain this kind of luxury, like the New York or a Hong Kong with 8 million people. They have a big tax base, so they can sustain it. Then we also have education, but because everybody wants to live here, and for the longest time, our city, I fight with my community day in, day out. You can ask Gordon Chin. I said, we can't just be building senior housing. We have to build family housing. And I, cajoled them, threatened them, and so we built some family housing because developers, you have to force them to build family housing because it's bigger, it costs more, and most people can't afford to live in those apartments. So senior housing is easier to deal with. And so,
I have a question. I'm just wondering whether or not Chinatown is just a situation that's frozen in time right now. Because there was an article in the New York Times about the declining population in the Chinatowns throughout the United States. And I wanted to get your comments on that and whether you feel that that is in fact happening, because there's out-migration there as well, and even the new people that are coming in are not necessarily going to Chinatown, but are moving into other areas.
That was a question that 40 years ago, when I started to work in Chinatown, it was the heated question. There were two schools of thoughts. One school thought that, it's a gilded ghetto and it will be all over, in a few years and what have you. Then there's another school of thought which I supported, and I said, no, we're an immigrant community, and the immigration will just keep on coming. So what happens, I think, the Chinatowns of America, like our community here, provides not only an orientation place for new immigrants. If it weren't for Chinatown, our people will be completely lost. I would rather guess we'll have thousand-folds of mental health cases of people not knowing how to adjust. Where else can you find a community where you can go in with very limited money and bring a family? Yes, some of our single rooms have 5 people living in it. But where else can you go if that's all the money you have? Where else can you go where, if you don't have the proficiency of the English language, and you find everything you need there? You have every denomination of church and temple there. You have every kind of school there. You have every type of grocery, every type shoe store, clothing store. It's a contain sufficient, city within a city. Where else can you go if you're a monolingual Chinese? You can go into the theaters. You can go into the bookstores and speak the same language. And no, Chinatown is a living, breathing, growing, evolving, changing community. 20 years ago, it was nothing but seafood restaurant because that was the trend that bunch of immigrants brought into Chinatown. Now the trend is Sichuanese hot food because a new group of immigrants came in and brought what they eat and what they like there. And where else can you find a minimum wage job washing vegetables? Where else? Who would hire you if it weren't for those places? That's why I have trouble, when they shut down, they call sweatshop. 50,000 of our women between 30 and 60 years old, monolingual Chinese women, used to work in those sweatshops that brought $600, $800 each back into the family so that they were able to save the money that 20 years later, now they're buying the home at Outer Mission, they're buying the home in Daly City or whatever. But that's what immigrant community do. And it used to be, when I arrived 40 years ago, the dialect you heard in Chinatown were Taiwanese. And the old guys used to tell me, what kind of Chinese you are if you don't speak Chinese? I said, what the hell do you mean? I speak perfect Chinese. You're the one that speaks country bumpkin dialect, And then now you hear Mandarin, you hear Sichuanese, you hear Chinese. So it's always evolving. That's why Chinatown is so precious. That's why redevelopment, the government, we don't let them come in and destroy. That's our soul. A community without a soul is nothing. It's just buildings. So I don't mind if our buildings, some of them needs a coat of paint, but it's people that live there, people that need shelter, that we provide for. Otherwise, they'll be out in the street. I don't mind it. Yes, I wish they all have each their own private room, but this is only temporarily. They always aspire for a better future. So when their kids grew up a little bit, the older one can find a job. They rent the room next door, so the bigger kids can have their own room. The parents can, and the grandparents can have their own room. And then later on, 3 years later, so their kid rent the room the other side. Daytime, you should look. Daytime, you go in there, they take up the planks and put it along the wall, and they use the higher thing to use it as a dining table or do homework. At night, they remove those and put the planks down so they can all sleep in it. But they all know that sooner or later, once they get their education, they get settled, they can move on for a better place. In the meantime, that's what we make do.